speakers today are obviously going to talk about the history of McMinnville. I'd like to introduce you to them just quickly. Elisa Alston, there she is right there, received her BA in English from UC Davis and her MLIS from the Dominican University. She's worked as a stagehand, a Peace Corps volunteer, a grant writer, a software sales rep, and is happiest in her current role as an archivist at Linfield University. Tori is a book-devouring, knowledge-seeking, fun-loving library student. She has worked in libraries for years and now is dabbling in archival work as well. She strives to become a librarian to serve her community. We'd like to welcome you and take it over from here.
All right, so you guys heard my name is Tori. I'm an intern at Linfield. I am working on getting my master's in library science. And can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good. So my first questions for you all is, who here has lived in McMinnville for a really long time? Well, you know, anybody go to Linfield? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, okay, so hopefully I can teach you guys like one new thing today, because I'm not originally from McMinnville. I just think that the history here is really cool. So hopefully we all learn something new, whether you've lived here for a really long time or just a few years. So, like I said, I'm an intern at the archive, and the archive is in the back of Nicholson Library at Linfield. We have all sorts of amazing stuff. I really recommend, after, if you guys didn't get to peruse some of these artifacts, come on up when you're at the end, check out what we have. This is just like a very small sampling of the very interesting stuff that we have going on at the archive. We are a Linfield archive, but because Linfield and McMinnville are so intertwined, we end up having a lot of McMinnville history as well. We are also a wine archive. So if that's something that interests you, we have a lot of materials on that as well. All right, so the first question is, who were the first people here in McMinnville? There you go. So the Yamhill Kalapuya were the first people here. You can see in this map, you can see how massive this amount of territory was. It actually went from southern Washington all the way down to northern California. Obviously, in the last 200 years, things have changed drastically. So now, this is the Grand Ronde Reservation. The move from that prior slide to here is referred to as the Oregon Trail of Tears. And the Grand Ronde have gone through a lot. They were federally recognized. They got their federal recognition taken away in the 50s. That meant they lost some land. They lost hunting status. Back in the, I believe, 80s, they got to reinstate their federal recognition. And if this is something you're interested in, I cannot recommend enough to go to the Chichalu Museum. It's on the Grand Ronde Reservation. It's amazing, and they have the beautiful art. They just reopened their new gallery, and it's absolutely stunning. So, who were the first settlers to come to McMinnville? People say two different things. Some people say it's Baker. He came in 1844, and he rode into McMinnville on what was, it's now Baker Street, but it was originally a trail used by indigenous people through the area. The other person people say was the first settler was Newby. He claimed 640 acres, and he named this town after his hometown, McMinnville, Tennessee. Now, most people accredit the founding to Newby. They sort of both showed up around the same time, but Newby had a lot more money and donated to a lot more stuff in the area. So it's likely that's why he gets accredited with, you know, the naming and everything else. On this photo, this is the original millstone, and you can still see this behind the public library. In order to get this millstone to McMinnville, they had to put it on a boat, float it all the way up to Lafayette, and then put it on a sleigh and have oxen drag it here because it was so heavy that if they put it in a wagon, the wagons would just sink into the mud. So there was no way to get it here except for those methods. All right, so this is an original map of the town, and there's a little guide down here. It might be hard to see, but you can see this is where the original mill was, off of what was called A Street. And next to that, you can see you've got a general store and the blacksmith. They sort of did this, you could have like a one-stop shop kind of experience. You could bring in whatever you need to be milled, and while you were waiting, you could go get everything else that you needed at the general store. You could, you know, get your horses reshoed, whatever you needed to do. And you can see we had, you know, a church over on 2nd, and what else is on here? The academy. Where is that one? Oh, down here. So, kind of an interesting map. Yeah, it kind of gives a fun visual of just how small everything was. All right, so that academy that we talked about on the last slide, it was started by a man named Aaron Payne. He charged $5 a student. You could go anywhere between, if you were 6 to 60, you could attend his school. We're not sure exactly what was taught. But it was an option. Later, Newby donated land that would become Linfield University. At the time, it was McMinnville College. Before that, it was the Baptist College. So that was the origins of that. Unfortunately, nobody graduated from Linfield until 1884. So it took some time. Originally, it was a lot of kids who would come in the off season, right? So they would come in the winter. They would start doing their schoolwork. And then when planting season happened, they were back out. So people were doing their education in really small chunks. Why it took quite a long time. Oh yeah.
I get to guest speak for a minute. So Linfield history is my specialty within our department, and so I'll just provide a little bit of Linfield specific history for you. So in 1848, there started to be a bunch of discussion in Oregon City, around Oregon City. A lot of Baptists came together and said, we ought to have a school, we ought to have some education that is Baptist focused, run by Baptists, and let's get that organized. And as Tori mentioned here, Newby donated land along with a handful of other folks in 1855. All of the McMinnville residents, and that was explicitly for the establishment of a school. And shockingly, people who had never run a school found that it was difficult to run. So, in 1858, the Baptist College of McMinnville was founded by actual educators, and not just Newby and co. So I had a couple of questions today asking about when was Linfield founded. The official answer is 1858 as the Baptist College of McMinnville. Somewhere along the line we kind of dropped the Baptist out because by 1873, as noted in our catalogs up here, our school catalogs, the school was known as McMinnville College. So we've dropped the Baptist College and just made it into McMinnville College. What I think is fascinating about these, other than obviously they're old things and that's really cool, is that they have a listing of all of the students, where they are from. All but 3 of them are from Oregon. The proposed first-year curriculum was very heavy on Greek and Roman history because that was the foundation of a classical education. And you could rent the use of the college piano for $3 a term. The other thing that I love about the 1872 catalog is that it delineates what degree you would get if you finished your college education. So if you finished all of your college courses and you did well in your languages, you would get a BA. If you did not do well in your languages, you would get a BS. So that's 1872. In 1898, the college was officially recognized by the state of Oregon as McMinnville College, so it's officially McMinnville at that point. You may already know why it's currently called Linfield, which is in 1922. The widow, Frances Ross Linfield, donated a hefty chunk of change to the school, and so it's named after her late husband, Charles Linfield, who never actually set foot anywhere in this area because he had passed away 20, 30 years prior in Minnesota, Wisconsin, one of those states. And then obviously in 2020, we became Linfield University with the introduction of additional graduate degrees. All right, I'm gonna sit back down.
Okay, so as we know, McMinnville currently holds the county seat. There are two stories as to how this came to be. One story, very juicy, is that there was a secret ballot and it was only given to people in McMinnville, and they all voted for McMinnville to be the county seat. No one else could vote, and that's how we got it. So that's one story. It's fun. It's not likely, but it's fun. The other story is that McMinnville's population growth was just really, really outpacing that of Lafayette's, which was the previous county seat. There's a lot of reasons that this happened. The biggest is that we got the railroads, and Lafayette originally really did not want railroads in their town. I don't know why, but they did not want them. So because of the railroads, we were able to get so many more things into our town. Do you remember I was just telling you about the millstone and how we had to do all this work to get it here? Now we don't have to do that. So previously to the railroads, everything was built out of lumber because that was the only material light enough to haul in or to harvest locally. After this, we're able to put in brick buildings. That's where we get a lot of our really great historical buildings in the downtown area are from this era of when the railroad came in, finally could get the building materials. In with the building materials came more industry. In with more industry came more people. So this just really boomed the population where Lafayette did not have railroad go through, so it stayed the same. So, oh, you have a question?
Well,
Sure.
I was just going to ask what type of industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's multiple industries at the time. There was a carpentry industry, lumber and milling, and then it also sort of made agricultural industry even more productive because we were able to ship things out to other people. So those were kind of the big things at that time. So we have these great railroads. Who built them? Mainly Chinese men. The labor was very cheap, and it was really horrible hard work, and a lot of people did not want to do it. However, once they were here, they were treated horrendously. The same story that goes on and on forever. You know, people thought that they were stealing their jobs. So there's really big discrimination against Chinese people here in Oregon, but honestly throughout the West entirely. Because of this, there's something that happens called the Chinese Exclusion Act. It makes it illegal for Chinese people to immigrate to the country, sometimes to even visit. It makes it impossible to buy land if you're Chinese. So it's kind of it's really quite horrible. And in 1964, it was finally legal for Chinese people to live in city limits of McMinnville again. That being said, it's not as if there were no Chinese people here, right? However, oftentimes they were living on the outskirts of the city, and then they would have businesses sometimes in the city. They would not be able to own the land, but they could own their business. So this is the interior of a Chinese restaurant. I believe it was in the basement of the Eagles Club at the time. There's rumor that it was a brothel and rumor that it was an opioid den. but yeah, opium den. But it probably, it could have been, but it also could have been just like really racist allegations. Who knows? All right. First car in McMinnville. If you want to check it out, it is at the Yamhill Historical Society. It's pretty cool. This car did lead to the first traffic laws in the state. Yeah, so the guy who owned it was very proud to have this car. It was the only one in town, obviously, and his sons would like to also take it out for a spin. One day, one of the sons was going down Main Street, allegedly too fast, and hit a dog. And that led to the first traffic laws in the state. More fun additional facts about this. McMinnville was not paved until 1912. There were no paved roads between Portland and McMinnville either at this time. So this man bought this car and drove on dirt from Portland to here, which I think, as someone who made that drive today, very impressive. Very impressive. All right, also 1912, we get the Carnegie Library. This is just really cool because the building is still intact. It's been added on to now, but it's absolutely beautiful, and I recommend you check it out if you get the time. Okay, Liberty Park was downtown, and it's kind of a washed out photo, so it's a little hard to see, but we've got a giant Statue of Liberty, and this was a place where people would meet mainly to gather money for war bonds, so it's kind of a fundraising effort. And later, Miss Lady Liberty ended up being a statue in the swimming pool after the war. So there was a swimming pool next to the library, and she lived in there for a while. So shout out to the resourcefulness of McMinnville. All right, so next we'll talk a little bit about the Great Depression in McMinnville. We've got a couple industries that were keeping people afloat during that time. This one is a glove factory. About 111 women were employed here. It was highly sought after work because it was steady, you got the same paycheck, and allegedly the work conditions weren't so bad. I look at that photo, I think, maybe not. Another common way people were making money was in agriculture, right? So the big crops to pick would have been hazelnuts and hops. People often had their kids out there with them picking these things. And those two look really happy, but I doubt that was always the case. I think it was a really hard time, but luckily this area is really blessed agriculturally, so that was definitely helpful for the people of McMinnville. All right, McMinnville also had a zoo. Did anybody know about the zoo? All right, so basically they just enclosed native animals in the area. But it was a big part of entertainment for a while. This was also next to the public library. You can see Bruno here. He was part of the act. All right, and then we get into World War II. This is Bob Jones. He was an alum at Linfield, and if you're interested, I've got his uniform up in the front, so definitely check that out. A lot of young men were enlisted, and this led to a lot of different things. There was a big effort on the home front because all of the men were gone, right? So up here I also have a bunch of articles and political cartoons from that time, from the beginning of the war, talking about women going into training programs to learn how to assemble airplanes, and scrap metal drives, and blackout drills in the city, and all these different aspects of the war, victory gardens, all that stuff. So I recommend you check those out too, because it's really interesting. All right, so when we went, we had a bunch of young men go off to war. Somebody still needed to work the fields here. We have huge agricultural economy and no young men to work it. So what happened is there was an act called the Bracero Program, which allowed Mexican men to come up into the United States and to work seasonally in order to get crops out of the field. Because what was happening is these men left, things are starting to rot in the field. We don't have enough labor to get them out. This actually ended up leading to a lot of people immigrating to the United States, and now 16% of McMinnville is Latine, which is really cool. All right, so now we're getting up into the 50s, and one of the cool things happening at McMinnville at the time, or in Linfield, I should say, was the Research Institute, the Linfield Research Institute. This is a physics program, and I don't know how much people know about it, but I think it's really fascinating. There were 3 different businesses started because of it. I'm going through their documents right now. They've got contracts with NASA. They've got contracts with the Department of Defense. So they were doing some really top-notch stuff here in McMinnville, which I think is just super interesting. All right, Columbus Day storm. I'm guessing many of you could tell me more about this than I can tell you about this, if you're local. Basically, massive storm hit the Oregon coast. The effects were felt very far in, definitely past McMinnville. The damage was ridiculous. It was quite the catastrophe. And lastly, I'll call upon Alyssa to talk about wine in Oregon.
Cool. So my boss, Rich Schmidt, will be here in 2 weeks, and he will be talking to you about the Oregon Wine History Archive that we have at Linfield. So I won't go too in-depth, and I won't steal his thunder, because he absolutely has an hour and a half, or 4 hours, or 8 hours to talk to you about that. But just to give you a little bit of a primer here, winemaking in Oregon started in the 1840s, officially being recorded. We have no idea, who was planting grapes and what kind of grapes there were before that. But the official recorded first planting of, or the official record of winemaking in Oregon is in the 1840s. Prohibition, as you imagine, curtailed that growth. But we can't talk about wine in Oregon without talking about Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is the king of the Oregon wines, and that really started to be planted here in the 1960s. And there were Willamette Valley vintages that were being produced as early as the early 1970s. I think Roseburg and down south got a little bit of a head start on us, but we're talking about McMinnville, so that's what I'll talk about. Obviously, if you know anything about wine, you know that we started to win lots of awards internationally, and that's kind of why we're on the map today from those awards 40, 50 years ago. A last fact is that in 2010, there were approximately 400 bonded wineries in Oregon. So 13 years ago, there were 400. How many do you think there are today?
500.
I hear 700. Can I get an 8? Can I get an 8? Can I get a 9? Can I get a 9? 1,000.
Oh my.
1,000 bonded wineries today.
I can see that.
People all over the world. And then one last thing I want to flag is the International Pinot Noir celebration that's been here at Linfield for, almost 15 years now. It's kind of midsummer wine summer camp, and it brings people and wines from all over the world to our little corner of Oregon. A lot of them stay in the Linfield dorms and pay a pretty penny to do so, and eat gourmet food and wine.
So that brings us up to present day, which is fun, but do you guys have any questions about the past? Any questions about anything we talked about? Sure.
We talked about the men leaving during World War II. What about World War I?
Yeah, there were quite a few men enlisted.
Repeat the question.
Oh, yes. So the question was, a lot of men left during World War II. What about World War I? yes, also many men left during World War I. I don't know if the labor shortages were as extreme during that time, or if I just didn't find reporting on it during my research. But that would be an interesting thing to look into, is like, who was picking things that time? Like, what happened there? Yeah, that's a really good question. Any other questions?
This one right here.
Yeah.
Was Lady Liberty in the swimming pool or
She
in the
was.
building?
She was. So she was kind of on a pedestal in the pool. So you could swim up to Lady Liberty.
Are you going to talk about newspapers?
I can talk a little bit about newspapers. I'm not an expert. A lot of my research came from reading the Telegraph. That is not digitized. So in order to read that, I had to go sit and look at microfilm to read through it, which honestly, my nerdy self thought was pretty fun. But that was like the main historical paper that I used. I don't have a lot of information about like current papers.
The reason Lafayette was a county seat because of the river.
Oh
In
yeah.
those days, they didn't have any other transportation and they came up the river.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, remember we talked about the millstone, they floated it all the way up to Lafayette, so that's exactly why it was the county seat to begin with. Also, they had a bigger population, right? Because they're right on the river, right where everything is happening. But then once the railroads came through, it made that a less optimal transportation route.
Yeah, being an old woodsman, I was curious about the logging camps and stuff on the coast for all the supplies for lumber for the aircrafts and stuff. Did you have much information about that?
You know, I don't have a ton of information about that. I wasn't able to look too much into like coastal history. I was looking more specifically about McMinnville. I do know I was able to find some information about like building one of the first airplanes here in McMinnville. It was entirely made out of wood, which I thought was really interesting. It's, I believe, still on display at the Evergreen Museum. So if you want to see that, that's something I know. But other than that, I don't have a ton of information on that. I'm sorry. Any more questions?
I have a question. At Linfield, do you have an office where people can come and look at your archives, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you can email us at archives@linfield.edu and set up an appointment, or you can give us a call and we can get that number for you.
I have my business card at the desks.
Sweet. There's business cards at the desk if you would like to take a look at those. And you can give us a call, set up an appointment, come on in. We're happy to show you. We've got so much cool stuff in there. I wish I could have, brought more out to share, but there's only, so much we can carry. Yeah, it's really worth the trip, I think, if that's something you're interested in looking at.
I had heard the story. I'd heard the story related that the town fathers got together and drove out to Lafayette and stole the county records and brought them back to McMinnville.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yep, so that is a story that I have heard. The historian that I spoke to said that is not what happened, but he said that it makes for such a good story, right? That it keeps getting passed around, because that is awesome. Like, under the cover of darkness, like sneaking around, stealing records. That's cool, but not according to the historian I talked to. That is not what happened at all. It was actually pretty civil.
This is just kind of a fun fact. Probably most of you know it. A few years ago, there was a contest for the prettiest main street in America. And McMinnville, Oregon, lost out, and they came in second, but they lost out to a town called McMinnville, Tennessee.
That is our namesake, so almost fitting.
Do you have any information to share on prominent women in McMinnville who influenced the city and the lifestyle we live today?
That's a really good question, and yeah, yay for women.
Yay for women.
I don't have a ton of information about women of Linfield history because I wasn't really focusing on any specific people. I read a bit about like the wives of some of these settlers, and they did some impeccable things. Like one woman, she had 13 children. I was like, that's impressive.
I can actually speak to that.
Oh, I don't know about Abigail Dunaway, but I was going to say Mihaela Cozine, Samuel and Mihaela Cozine. She's very much an unsung hero. I don't know exactly why, but we have tons of stuff in the archives. If you want to come by, we'll pull it for you and we can talk about it.
Any other question? Oh,
I'd like to just add at our library book sales that we have every other month, we do have an assortment of wonderful historical books that are donated about Oregon. And so if you come to the sale, this will be the next one's November 11th, right, Mike? We usually have very nice copy of wonderful quality books on the history of Oregon and often about McMinnville. And they're very reasonably priced, so be sure to come.
Always support your libraries. Always, always support your libraries. Yeah, I read a couple really great books on the history of McMinnville, some of the really helpful ones. There's one called McMinnville in Photos, which is actually where a few of the photos of my presentation came from. I read a couple other ones that I'm blanking on the title of right now, but I got them at the Yamhill County Historical Society. They've got a library that you can't take things from, but you can sit there and read, and I did a lot of research in there as well on it. So if you're looking for more reading materials, they're good places to look.
Many of you probably remember a wonderful lady named Margaret Larson, and she was part of the Larson Buick dealership family thing. I used to own the tea room downtown for a while, and she'd come in every Thursday, and she had all these stories about McMinnville that were just wonderful. And I said, Margaret, you should write these down. And she said nobody would read them. And I said, I would. But anyway, one was the Buick dealership was right on the corner where Berkshire Hathaway Realty is, and they had one new car, room for one new car in their showroom. And some guy, and apparently there used to be a huge Christmas tree in the intersection of Davis, Evans, one of those streets. And some guy bought his wife this Buick for a Christmas present, drove it down as far as the Blue Moon Cafe, got drunk, and drove it into the Christmas tree.
yay, McMinnville members. Well, I want to thank you all for coming and also for our guest speakers. We appreciate your information, and hopefully maybe some people will come give you some more information, a lot of history here, and also come down and visit your archives. Thank you.